let's talk about it.
Hello and welcome back to Thicc Radio, the award-winning podcast where we talk about gaining, feedism, and everything plus size. I'm James.
And I'm Tim, so let's get into it. Today we're welcoming back to the show a good friend of ours, Nat from Kink Vision.
Hi, thanks for having me on again.
Again, baby, how are you?
I'm great. How about you? I mean, you, James, have made a lot of appearances on Kink Vision already. Like, we had a 2-hour conversation that we recorded, and I've been taking little bits of that basically since we have that.
I am the podcasting equivalent of a chum bucket. Just sort of like get a little portion out here and there, throw it on the wall, a bit of spackle, cover up any holes. I'm a great filler like that, honestly.
Filler.
No, I've made a few appearances, that's true. And it's been a delight. I think, we talk about this behind the scenes, right? Like, as podcasters, it's always interesting, like, how do you do what you do? What's your approach to format, layout? And obviously, Kink Vision is not your first podcast, but it's always, of course, interesting when you're on the other side of it. I'm not in control of that edit. I don't see how that particular sausage gets made. And then, like, just seeing how you apply different parts of that conversation on reflection. It's wonderful the way you're able to work it all together into the episode. So I think first here at the top of today's conversation, you'll need to check out and subscribe to Kink Vision. Where can people find Kink Vision online, Nat?
So it's on basically any podcasting platform you use. So if you use Spotify or Apple Podcasts or any of that, it's all there.
Marvelous. And of course, if you go and check it out, you will no doubt hear a little bit of me across quite a number of the episodes. But no, it's not the promotion we're here to do today. Today we're here to talk. Tim, baby, I saw you roll your eyes. What's that about?
Oh, nothing. I'm just listening to you congratulate yourself.
Who, me, a star?
Yes, you.
The elusive chanteuse that
Christ,
is
here we go again.
stannnum. The gorgeous, young, effervescent, beautiful, darling of the screen and stage girl.
And your best friend, the Crypt Keeper.
Well, yes.
Yes.
Yes. Together, Tim and I make one Dorian Gray. I am the vampire eternal, and Tim is...
I'm the painting.
You just called yourself the Crypt Keeper, bitch.
I know, and I'm just playing into the crap that you always do with me because I know damn well in 10 years it's going to be reversed.
Yes, that's very true. For anyone who, for whatever reason, has not seen what Tim and I look like, I am unfortunately afflicted with a disease known as Caucasian. And Tim is a lovely mix of bits and pieces. So right now, he and I look about the same age, and in 10 years' time, when we're living in the same city, we're going to go out to get a coffee. Tim's going to be real cute. He's going to go, babe, don't you worry, I got this. I'm going to go pay. I'm like, oh, great, I'm going to finish my cake. He goes up to the counter, he pays, and the attendant says, it is so nice of you to take your elderly father out for one last meal before he croaks.
To which I will say, yes, I know, isn't it? I'm so charitable.
So I'm just getting it good while I've still got something to say. God damn it. Oh, my goodness.
Okay, well, I think this is kind of a good segue into sort of what we're talking about. Because, yeah, it's like, well, thinking of, like, the idea of, like, twinks and twink death and what a daddy is and things like that and everything. Because an issue with twink death, one, it sounds negative, but like the other thing is like, what about those of us who like really didn't get that twink privilege when we were like in our 20s because we were fat, or because compared to how I look today, I was a twink when I was 20, but I wasn't treated like a twink. Like I moved to a college town at 21, and I almost never got carded because I feel like I just looked 21. I had a friend who was a decade older than me who he got carded all the fucking time and I didn't. And so, you know, like the little things that kind of does to your self-esteem and all of that, of like, I was never really a twink. I never got to enjoy being a twink when I was when I was that young.
Don't feel bad, James. I don't get carded anymore.
What's the oh god, I forget her name. She's like a Canadian comedian, and she was doing a scene with this woman. She's like the attendant at the booze shop, and she says to the lady, "Oh, can I see your ID?" And the lady, who's in her 40s or something, is like, "Me getting carded? Oh, here's my ID. Ooh." And then she says, "Yeah, we need to make sure that you're actually applicable for the senior discount because people try to apply it sneakily." And I was just like, scalped head to toe. Fantastic stuff. So listen, today we are doing one of these episodes, and listen, we've done AI already, and we want to do a couple more of these, right? Initially, we're maybe looking at things like, they call them the cognitive sciences. It's like the understanding of the human mind, and just basically how it is that we function as human beings. And the reason I want to do these episodes is because it is like the central question to every motherfucking Kinkster. In the gaining community, I would imagine in bondage, I would imagine in every community, where you're just sat there one day and you're like, why? Why am I like this? Why do I like this? What does this say about me? What is this? Where does this come from? Where are we going, Cotton Eye Joe? All that stuff, right? And linguistics is a part of the cognitive sciences, and that is what we're here to talk about today. So, Nat, let's be clear about this. When we spoke to you about this episode concept, you explained to us you would be talking about this through the idea of rhetoric, right?
Yes.
What is rhetoric?
Okay, so linguistics and rhetoric, they're kissing cousins of some kind, like in the cognitive kind of connections that you were talking about. So rhetoric is basically the study of messaging around certain topics, like how are things currently being talked about right now? What kinds of things will be remembered in the future? Why are these contexts assigned to them? So language is more like, I don't know, like the literal words and syntax and things like that that go into things that we're saying. Rhetoric is like what we're actually saying and talking about, and just the cultural symbolic meanings that are assigned to all of these things. Because one thing I just thought of as I was preparing for this is language is something that lasts for centuries and generations and everything like that. Rhetoric probably doesn't last very long, like, because it exists in the moment, and then it might come up later in the future if people are recalling this time and this conversation and whatever like that. But yeah, I think those are like the main distinctions between that.
Yeah, when we were doing some initial research, of course, wanting to get our heads around what it is we're actually talking about, right? Core parts of linguistics, I think, are going to be around things like the phonetics of it, like the properties of speech itself, phonology, like how sounds actually are, the morphology and shape of words. So I think rhetoric is very much going to play a big part in this, especially because ultimately we can talk about language and the use of words and things like fat historically in the kinds of things like Rubenesque, or Falstaffian and things that have a more historic context. But certainly I think rhetoric in terms of, well, how do we apply that and what does it mean to us in the here and now is probably more pertinent really as part of the conversation. So I think that's going to be absolutely cracker for today. So how do you feel rhetoric and linguistics could better help us understand our sense of kink?
Yeah, so I think a good place to start with this is just the understanding that words matter and words are important. Just kind of thinking about when words are used pejoratively to describe a certain group. Most of the times it's used in a dehumanizing way of indicating that these people are somewhat lesser or something. And then, when you kind of go down that rabbit hole and let people just essentially remain ignorant about a certain group and just only understand it through this lens, this language that it's being talked about, then what are the repercussions of that? I mean, it could make it a lot easier for people to not empathize with those people that have this like label attributed to them. They might think it's okay to take away their rights or not give them rights or invalidate them in some way or denying them certain care or services or something like that, because you're attributing this label which has a lot of baggage to it, and then that's kind of having an effect on how society and culture looks at and treats them. It's like, I mean, can you think of ways that with fatness of how these certain words can kind of lead to that?
Well, I mean, even the word fat is loaded because,
Mm.
you say fat and it conjures up different things for different people, but it's usually a negative association. It's a word that's
Mm.
thrown around as an insult.
Yeah.
It's only just now kind of becoming a thing where people are like, no, that's what I am. I'm fat. It's not an insult. That's just what I am. But, prior to, God, like 15 years ago, like you couldn't say fat, you were supposed there was this weird dichotomy in society where it's like you're supposed to constantly obsess about your weight but never talk about it. You
Mm.
know?
And we wonder why we're in the position we're in now, which
Yeah.
again is really the point of this kind of conversation, right? I think someone who reads the title of this and hears that introduction might go, what the fuck does words have anything to do with my experience as a gainer? When in actual fact, it has everything to do with that experience. And we know this within the community. A huge kink that some people love to engage in, they call it pig play, which I also understand in the broader kink context is, again, a very different thing. But some people love to be denigrated with language. They love to be teased and humiliated. They want to be called names. They want to be called piggy and fat boy and, insulted because that is an affirmation to them. And frankly, that's a little bit of me. If I know you, you know me, and that's what we're on board with doing, baby, go ham. It's fabulous. But there are plenty of people who, if you say that to them, oh, it's an insult. Because to them, that's a trigger. That's a direct negative. And we need to wrap our heads around the notion that language is not consistent for every single person. Interpretation is going to be different. Intent is different. I say this joke to my friend all the time and they love it. Well, guess what, baby? I'm not your friend. I'm not the dude that you go out and get drunk with and have a certain bond with. I'm a different hoe. You've got to come to me in the way that I like. And if you think it's
See,
fine to excuse that,
people just got too damn comfortable. People got too damn comfortable. They were like, oh, well, because I can call my friend a cow, I can go around and call anyone else a cow because it's a joke and it's not really sick. No.
mm,
Like, do not get that fucking comfortable. You do not fucking know people. Okay?
mm,
You have no idea what word could trigger them to anything, into a panic attack, suicidal ideations, or violence. So be very careful.
And
baby.
yeah, I mean, all of this even reminds me of like Nicole Byer has a joke of like how she addresses her fatness and how she would get audience members come up to her and say, "Oh no, don't call yourself fat. You're beautiful and everything." And she's like, "Okay, like those two words, like they can go together. You can be beautiful and fat." And also just like the whole thing of, "Oh no, she knows. Like she knows that she's fat. She's being self-aware about it." Like and people are
Again, this whole thing
uncomfortable with
about
that.
we have to obsess about our weight constantly. We can't draw any attention to it. We're not allowed to talk about it, but it's supposed to be on our minds constantly.
So listen, to anyone listening to this episode today, and of course, we expect some amount of crossover having our gorgeous friend Nat here with us today. Obviously, the conversation is primarily going to focus on gaining and feedism. We'll talk a little bit about bondage, of course, as it pertains throughout all of this. But if you are listening, regardless of your kink, sexual narrative background, if you've got ideas, thoughts of words that come to mind for you, triggers, things that you're a little uncertain about. This is part of the dialogue and how we begin to nut through these things. Write into us at thickradio@gmail.com. Share your thoughts and let's keep the conversation rolling along, kids.
Nat, I wanted to ask, so when it comes to our use of language, to what extent is linguistic knowledge innate or learned? Is there anything that I mean, I suppose being humans, we learn everything by observing others, but like, is there anything that seems to be a bit more instinctual?
Yeah, so I don't remember the study. It was like in sociology in high school, like I read about it. I think it was something that happened in the 70s. Basically, people discovered some woman who was like locked in like a room for like most of her life and treated sort of like an animal. And then so that was like gold for like psychology and sociology
Is
researchers and everything. Yes.
is that what the movie Nell is based on?
It might be. Yeah, like
Okay.
because basically we have an adult woman and she's like behaving kind of like an animal. And then so a lot of observations they made about her was she had ways of verbalizing because humans are verbal creatures. So she had ways of verbalizing, but she could not speak language, she couldn't speak English or anything. She didn't understand words or things that people told her and stuff like that. And so I think that's kind of the main thing with it is the most language I think is learned, and then it gets learned in different ways in different cultural contexts. Like, you grow up in a Hispanic family, and so you learn like their version of Spanish and English and things like that. And then you wind up being gay in adulthood, and you start learning how gays talk with each other, and then you get into a fetishy kinky subgroup, and then you learn how this group talks with each other and everything. And yeah, like,
It's a lot of nomenclature as you get older. It's like a lot of different terms that mean different things. But I was going to say something that I remember from school during my obstetrics rotation is we were learning about, when a baby is just born and, all the things that we have to do. But we were also shown I think it was a sociologist that was performing the experiment, that they took babies that had been born to different mothers from different parts of the world that spoke different languages. And they noticed that no matter what word the mother was calling out, and this is probably just an animal thing, but like all of them would respond, like, and they would go down the line and like do their baby in whatever language, and like they would all respond. I'm going to assume that's probably just a mammal thing, but it's still interesting to me.
something that this makes me think of is how people say that like if cats weren't like living like domestic lives with humans and like somehow just lived independently in a forest or something somewhere, that they wouldn't meow, that they only meow because they're like around humans and humans are always speaking, and so they're trying to speak with us like as if
Yeah.
they're humans as well.
I have a cat, and like I never realized that, like when they're together, that's not a communication thing. I mean, it sometimes is like a mother cat will like mewl to get the kitten's attention, but after they reach adulthood, they only meow to human beings. And I think I was reading somewhere that like in their brains, they see us as giant hairless cats.
I think they also think that they own us, and they're teaching us how to be all of
Well,
that,
that
because
is true. That
we
is
don't know
true.
how to be cats.
I did actually see a very interesting piece on. It speaks to that belief and it tweaks it slightly. So there is the belief that, like, oh, they see us as being dog kittens that don't look after themselves, but actually, what it's more like is because cats don't exist in the format of like a family unit with so specific partners and children rearing. It is a community situation, and so cats will share a communal space together and they look after one another. So for a cat, they understand psychologically what it means to procure food, eat food, and be okay. Usually when they are presenting you with things, it's because they're not seeing you eat food. So there's something to be said about, yeah, you want to keep like the cat and the dog bowls out of the kitchen, but actually there's a reason why they kind of pine for you to come with them to go get food, because as a creature, that's how they want to exist, in communion with you. You are the other member of their pack. So, it's a little more collaborative, I suppose, and straight ideas of ownership. But still, same kind of a vibe, right?
And just imagine
Yeah.
if humans could adopt that idea.
So something that's come to my attention with doing my kinky podcasting is I've had several people have an issue with that I use the term vanilla to basically talk about non-kinksters. And people make it seem like it's like very pejorative. And somebody even said it's like, oh, you use vanilla like it's a slur or something like that. And it's like, I don't. I mean, maybe it sounds like that because it's like most of the times when I bring up vanilla people, it's in a negative way of like, okay, well, I felt rejected or I felt kink shamed or I felt, this, that, or another thing from a vanilla or the vanilla world and community. And that's just kind of all I'm talking about with it. I'm not calling kinky people vanilla to like hurt their feelings or anything like that. Like there needs to be a distinction between, what I am and what the others are.
Well, it's like in the gainer community, you've got what we call civilians. Like that's our nomenclature for people who are totally outside of the community, have no idea what it's about, have like very minimal exposure to it. I used to call them normies. How does this intersect with the history of language around words associated with both gaining and feedism, like with fatness and societal judgment or acceptance?
So some of the research that I shared with you guys, it gets
Mm-hmm.
into different aspects of these things, like kind of historically. I mean, first of all, none of them really got into this, but like how the idea of like, I think the Renaissance era, pale chubby women were considered very attractive like during that time. And I think there was a class association with it. Is okay, well, she's pale because she's white. Also, she's privileged because she like hasn't worked, hasn't had to be in the sun or anything, and was able to just kind of be leisurely. And then also she has access to food and, you know, a surplus of food, and like she's comfortable. So that was considered attractive. And then there's like other things. Like, so I shared Foucault's A Discipline and Punishment, which it kind of goes all over the place because it talks about imprisonment and stuff like that, and a lot of things that tie into bondage. But the things that I always found interesting about it is he talks about the soldier figure of a good, attractive soldier figure looks like, and then also what that means, because he talks about them as like having docile bodies, because it means they are conditioned, they are trained to do this like one task. And so using basically a human body as like a machine, as a weapon, as a tool. He doesn't talk about fatness, but I feel like fatness would be almost the inverse of that. So fatness is basically chaos. You have your own kind of independent, nobody's going to control your body. You're not even controlling your own body because you're just kind of letting go and stuff like that.
You know, I read a study that was very interesting about the understanding of the feminine gender in relation to fat. And essentially, the conclusion that it comes to is that the way in which fatness in women and female aligned is treated is that it is a failing of the female gender, because it is seen that you are making yourself, by choice, unfuckable. Therefore, you will not breed, have children. Therefore, your value as a woman is lost because of your weight. And so, therefore, a lot of the iconography we use for women and the language is very monstrous. By, you know, that's the kind of things that are associated with larger women. We call them whales or trolls, ogres, you know, giantess, and it's all of these ideas that are meant to evoke something sort of big and out of control and bestial and just beyond, you know, the human experience. And it is interesting, right? The way in which, again, how that language is good that it can be reclaimed, but it is the way in which, you know, it's a slippery slope into becoming something that can be quite harmful.
So how do we acquire knowledge of fat adjacent language over time?
So, I mean, I think it mostly depends on how the culture and time kind of shifts and evolves, as well as what cultures you associate with, because you guys are gainers, so you guys speak about fatness in a very specific way, whereas, you know, there are fat civilian people and they don't talk about it that way. The other sources that I shared, like one of them talks about a fitness boot camp type of thing, and they use the word disavowment a lot in that, because like a lot of it is kind of disavowing the idea of like fatness or fatness as an identity. Like, okay, well, getting fit and getting into shape, I'm going to be the true Mary or whatever, you know, the person's name is, and all of that. Like saying that their true authentic self is not being a fat person. It's being a fit, disciplined person that has their shit together to kind of do all of this. And like, there's so much disavowment of that. And then also like, okay, well, I have the willpower and the strength to go to this boot camp and do all of that. And there's other people that they're just not going to do that. They're just going to stay at home and eat Cheetos and be fat. And there's a lot of that.
Absolutely. The moralizing of language, especially around fatness, and this ties very keenly into a lot of fat liberationist work, which is, you know, unpacking the moral ascription of value to one's body, and ultimately what ends up being the reality of body fascism, that we apply the notion of some form of human is more valuable than another. And this is one of those reasons why I keep talking about this book, Fearing the Black Body by Sabrina Strings. You've got to read it, get it on your wish list, get it for Christmas, honestly, because we can see a very easy link. You know, every movement of humanity, civil rights, queer rights, women's rights, disability rights, it all moves forward. But if we allow notions of fat phobia to remain and persist, we create a loophole by which we justify negative ideology. And so if I start making negative comments about a brown person's body, well, that's just because you wait. I'm not saying anything about, you know, I'm just saying, you know, you got to do. And suddenly we found a way in to start making issues for people all over again, because we decided that fat people weren't worth uplifting as a protected body, you know. So very, very important part to that conversation.
So how do we negotiate our biases in our perception that lead to, fat positive actions such as speech production?
Yeah, it made me think of the idea of bear building, like an interaction he had with somebody, and he came out basically as a gainer for the first time, and the guy was like, "Oh, you're just bear building," and it's like on one level, it's sort of looking at it through a different perspective and lens, where bear building and gaining. I don't know. There might be like little minute differences that like nobody really talks about or anything these days, but like they're essentially the same thing. Or it could just be like, okay, well, this one thing sounds a little bit more positive, and this other thing, is like a little bit more negative. Like, I mean, kind of getting to somebody bringing up my use of vanilla and stuff like that. Like, okay, so has there been any pushback about how you guys use fat and not some kind of euphemism for fat? Has that ever come up for you guys?
Nobody really well, I can't say that nobody ever calls me fat, but I mean, like to look at my body, it's pretty damn average for an American, for a guy my age, this is the body that most 40 somethings have. So if someone were to call me, I don't know, husky or stocky, I would probably correct them and be like, no, I'm just fat. Like it doesn't fucking matter. But that's because I am where I am mentally. So yeah, that doesn't really happen for me a whole lot.
Yeah, Tim and I have talked about this quite a lot. We understand that we're not exactly occupying the largest bodies around. We're not under any aspersions about how we look, especially compared to other gainers and other fat and plus size people. But language and the approach to language is very, very interesting, and especially inferences made. I remember an office gig I had before the pandemic here in the UK. One of the guys in the office randomly said to me one day, "Oh, you're looking hench." And I had no idea what he meant. I'd never heard the term before. And he's like, "Oh, hench, like henchman." And it dawned on me, like, okay, big, beefy, maybe works out, maybe has some kind of musculature, but ultimately, thick. Looks like that kind of guy. That was very affirming to me. And, mentioning before, for instance, the language used for women, the permission granted to size and the access of size is different between genders. Again, for women, the moment you hit a certain weight, it's all negative. There's no positive. And even inferences like, oh, she's curvy, oh, she's thick, she's juicy, she's voluptuous. All of those inferences are sex. Juicy, she's filled with fluid, she's filled with the sex juice. We can see very easily that. Whereas men, those allowances are husky, healthy, thick, ways in which we're sort of inferred to be just physically out in the world doing things, So back to that point on, what the inference of those words can be. Between the genders are different things. For men, that makes me sound like I'm a capable young man in the world taking charge. And for a woman of the same size, it sounds like she's ready to bed and produce heirs. Like it's two very different things.
It's like the comparison to like a cow that's being, primed for either breeding or milking or something.
Which again, it's bestial, it's animalistic, it's women as produce, as a resource to be mined, as livestock, as opposed to a man who has everything in front of him, Like, language is so fascinating in that regard, and fatness is not exempt from those biases, from those expectations. And I think this is important to remind listeners of here, because our communities, gainers and fetists, is very siloed for the most part. There's not necessarily a lot of crossover. So I imagine that for some queer men on the gainer side of things, maybe there's not a perceived negative when it comes to inferences like that, because we're all men here, so what's the problem? One, that's not true. We know that there are certain women, and of course non-binary people in the space, so that's not true. But second of all, it's good to be conscious of what we're saying and why we're saying it. Nat, you'd referenced Drag Race before, and a good example that came from Drag Race was the term fish or fishy. For a long time, that was perceived as being a positive indictment towards trans queens or drag queens who were trying to pass more for womanly in the classic cisgendered sense, seen as therefore the positive. But for a lot of cis women and trans men, people with vaginas walking into the space, to them it's derogatory because it's inferring that they are unclean and that their genitals are a marker for what is expected of what is essentially a gender performance, So it's good for us to be mindful about words when we hear these critiques and go, aha, there's something here. I should look at that. Let me go ahead and do a little bit of research,
Yeah, with the ongoing culture war that's just kind of happening everywhere, that I mean, that kind of feels like the basis of that. Of like, I don't know. I recently saw something about Bill Maher, and Bill Maher was like talking about how, oh, I've always been on the left. It's everybody on the left just moved like into another direction, or that kind of conservative sort of talking point, like with that of, oh, I've always been here, and everybody else moved, and it's like, well, yeah, because time is ever evolving. It's never
Yeah.
stopping for anybody or anything. And so the thing is, you're supposed to be able to like adapt to certain things, and it's like, okay, now I have more information, now I'm going to stop saying this, like
And when
that's.
I hear that from people, I'm like, you're just admitting that you're an asshole frozen in time. You're basically saying, I don't give a flying fuck that things have changed. I'm comfortable right where I am, and I'm not going to change it because I feel that I have earned the right to say whatever the hell I want. I'm just so tired of this shit.
Yet the elderly, older generations who feel that, well, back in my day, this slur here was what I called people like you, and they didn't have a problem with it at the time, so I'ma just keep going, and that's what you are, and there's no issue here, and you're just a sensitive, and you just sit there and you're like,
Well, see, but I'm
hmm.
always like, well, by the same token, I may not be as old as you, but I have also lived long enough to say whatever the fuck I want, and I think you're a piece of shit.
Yeah, it's funny. So with considering all of this, one thing kind of like that, like my mom always used that, it's like, God, I hope she still doesn't say it, but like she would say Indian giving a lot. And it's like it was something that, like, as a kid, obviously it's just something that my mom said, and I never really understood the context of it. And then when I got old enough to learn the context of it, like how wrong it is on just so many levels, it's just like we need to remove this from our vocabulary. This is not only offensive, it like actually isn't even historically accurate. Like,
James and I think it was in maybe the first season, possibly the second, we had an indigenous member of the community on the show, and he talked about a couple of words that people really use in the wrong way. And it, like, powwow was one of them, and spirit animal was another. These are two things that are taken very seriously by indigenous people, and it's thrown out there as just, just a simple colloquialism for a meeting, for the powwow. And everyone knows, oh, this person's my spirit animal. No, like, he explained to us that a spirit animal is the result of going on a vision quest, and that this is something spiritual and serious. And James and I we talk all the time about a particular word that was used in the 90s quite a lot. It was a word it was the R word for someone who is experiencing like a mental handicap or disability. And it was so ubiquitous that everybody was using it. Your teachers used it, your parents used it, it was all over television, it was printed on stickers, your priest used it. Like, this word just became so, just it was everywhere. And granted, that it became so ubiquitous to me that it became almost meaningless, and then I had to really catch myself every time that it was about to come out, because I was like, wait a minute, that's how accustomed I had become to saying certain words that were just a part of the lexicon.
It's the same with gay. Oh, that's so gay, right? Like, and when someone says that, they're like, that's a little bit, that's so gay, and they're using it as a negative, like, oh, that's so like whatever, and it's like, don't do that. Don't do that. And this, I feel like this actually ties a little bit into the conversation around labels. And this comes up a little bit this season for us, I think. Like, you've got people, I feel like, operate into very specific camps. You've either got people who are like, everything needs a label, we need more labels, we need to understand things with language and words. And then you get the people who are just like, I fucking hate labels. I think they ruin everything, destroys everything. I feel like the correct angle is like, it's a little bit of both. It's a little bit of both. We need language because in order to understand where we are, we have to have context in what we are in relation to. So that does help us to orient ourselves, almost like the idea of a sexual orientation comes from that concept.
yeah. So getting back to the whole vanilla thing with me and my podcast. So it is known that when the term homosexual came out, like heterosexual was not a word. Nobody said heterosexual because they never needed to distinguish asexuality from from other people. And then once homosexuals came out, then it's like, okay, well then non-homosexuals are heterosexuals, and then heterosexuals didn't like it. They're like, I don't like being defined by my sexuality, and like all of that. And then
So
like a
close
little
to the
bit.
point. So close to the point. They're dancing around it.
And then more recently with transgender and cisgender, I remember having like an argument with somebody about like, well, like he didn't want to be called cisgendered, because the root of that is like, okay, I am the normal person, I am part of the normal group, you get the label, you get the title, don't label me. And it becomes that whole thing. So I feel like with, with somebody somebody getting upset about me using the term vanilla, I think it was kind of some of that. Like, I mean, the person explained that it kind of felt like I was basically deeming who is vanilla and who isn't, or something, like as if I have that much power. I think because I'm like making myself distinct from, okay, well, I'm not gonna downplay my kink and act like, oh, I'm just like all the other people that are not kinky as well. It's like, no, like I am kinky. This is a thing. I am separate from the vanilla world. Like the vanillas are basically fish that don't even know that they're in water. It's like they're just like they're not aware of their surroundings or what they are. Like,
you can't make people happy. You could call somebody exactly what they are to their face, and not even in an insulting way. I could say, you are a white guy from Australia, and James could get pissed off by that. How dare you put labels on me? How do you know I'm white?
But you know what's really interesting, and from what you just said there, Nat, it says that there's two different interpretations of why one might apply a label. In so many of these instances, we apply labels to ourselves, and we talk a little bit about this on the pod, right? The first time that you call yourself a gainer, and I don't just mean you type it in your bio, I mean with the tongue and the teeth and the lips and the mouth and the breath of the lung, and you make the word and you say gainer, it does something to the spirit where you're like, oh, this shit just became so real. Like, to identify yourself is a wonderful feeling. And I think what you're noting there is that there are people who their interpretation of a label is as a bad thing, right? Like, for me, the label of fat, the label of gainer, the label of kinky, the label of ginger, of Australian, those can be such a source of pride and positivity, where there are some people who they get the sense that we're marking that with the big red X, like this is a... don't go here, don't look at this, don't look at the man behind the curtain. Like, it's very that. And maybe that speaks to something intrinsic to certain people, like how you approach the world. Like, do you approach the idea of someone standing in their power as a good thing, or someone in their power as a threat to your power?
Yeah. And I feel like it's something that, like, not until the past, like, decade, I would say, did it become kind of normalized for, like, most people to understand some aspect of like white people not being the majority, in a way of like, getting so much perspectives from people of color of like that kind of put white as other in a way. And obviously a lot of people don't like that. It's not saying, once again, like what Tim said, it's like, you're not saying anything bad about white people, you're just identifying that this is a white thing, this isn't the normal thing, it's just a white thing. Like, and there's so many people that are uncomfortable with that.
Well, they're finding out. Well, it's not that they're finding out. They're being called out for the first time for being the villains of history for the most part. But I'm curious. So how do you think that we test our own, fat phobic biases? Like, how do we go about deconstructing our own knee-jerk reactions and innate biases?
I mean, I feel like an interesting thing is thinking of, I guess, words that you use to describe fatness or gaining or anything. And I don't know, what are the cultural contexts behind them? Like, what do they actually mean? Are they things that are actually hurtful, or is it just more of like an individual's problem or something like that? It's like, I feel like a lot of like what we are doing with these kinky podcasts is normalizing certain things, normalizing these conversations and stuff. And like, I think that I think that's a big part of all of this, of kind of expanding the sort of vocabulary of this, expanding the discourse of it, making this like more like alive. Because I think another thing, like kind of going off of my experiences with the podcast, is I feel like when I started the Bondage Gaze in 2021, I feel like a lot of kinksters have probably not really heard other kinksters speak. Like, like there might be some hookups here and there where it's like you're meeting with one person at a time, and just you guys kind of hang out for a little bit, but maybe it's more transactional and there's not much of that interaction, and you don't go to kink events, and if you do, they're like once a year or something, and you're getting these limited bits of like just socially being with other people that are like you. But now with these podcasts, I'm clearly not the only one making kinky podcasts, and there's ones all over, so it's like normalizing that discourse for people and expanding that knowledge in that way.
100%. We talk about this all the time. Why don't we talk about gainer sex on the podcast? Because you know what, motherfucker? Every other bit of every other gainer content that every other kinkster out there produces is about the sex. Believe it or not, I don't think there's any stone left unturned when it comes to what turns you on and why it turns you on, right? I am far more interested in everything else that never gets talked about because you're too busy typing with one hand to have that conversation,
We are at a point now where you can just talk to an AI. Like, if you really want gainer sexy talk, just talk to an AI. I mean, there's thousands of them on Character AI and Sexy Chat and all the other.
And why does this thrive in kink communities? Because the majority of people who engage in kink communities are not looking for human connection. They are looking for transaction and what they can get. And if they can bypass the quote-unquote burden of having to be human with you, they'll skip right past that and go straight to the sex and take care of it themselves because they don't want to have to do it. It's like, why do these things thrive? Because this is the state of how people act. And what we do is very counter to that. And it is constantly pushing back against the expectation of what everyone else thinks is going to go on. Like, I'd be curious to ask you about this because Tim and I have had this before. Not in recent years, but certainly during season 1. People were like, oh, all the people that you're getting on the podcast are just the people who you want to fuck, and you're trying to organize some kind of like big fucking orgy. Because there's no context for comprehending human connection that isn't rooted in trying to get the sex out of you. Like, it doesn't compute.
So I haven't gotten anything like that about the podcast necessarily, but I have gotten that from, like, I guess content that I post of, like, pictures from, like, a bondage weekend that I have with friends. I remember once somebody was talking about a picture that I was in that, like, it was me and a bunch of people. We were doing, like, a faux hazing, and somebody said something about, like, one of the actors in the picture. And I was so confused, and I was even like, okay, that I'm in this picture, right? Like, I'm one of these people. And then it's like, also, like, these are, like, my friends and people I kind of know personally. And, we're doing all this idyllic, over-the-top stuff together, but we're friends having a good time. Like, this isn't, like, a ticketed event. This isn't, we're
the
not
bondage
actors,
cabal.
Well, and as someone who has also attended quite a few of these little bondage parties, events, so on and so forth throughout the years, I can tell you that the majority of it is mostly socializing. It's mostly a socializing hour. We might be naked. Somebody might be tied up. Somebody could potentially be getting fisted in another room, but this is really more of like a knitting circle. Like, it's not always what people think it is, and out of all the parties that I've been to, not everybody comes in the end. So sometimes it's just about experiencing whatever it is you want. If you want to get tied up, there's probably somebody who can do that for you. And whether or not you come, that's probably not even what you're after. You're probably just after the experience of being tied up.
Like, there's always a few straight guys sprinkled into this gay bondage community, and for one of these weekends we included a straight guy in it because he's really hot and he likes bondage and everything, so we wanted to include him, and he opted out at the end for I don't know what reason, but like, it was so funny. Like, we found it funny that he found it like the need to like say that he's not into anal sex before agreeing to come to this thing with us. And we're all like looking at each other like, okay, none of us have that kind of sex with each other or anything. Like, we do bondage. And the funny thing is, I have had a session with this man before and have gotten him off and stuff like that. And he's like cool with that. So it's like, yeah, you would do fine at one of these things. And it's like, but he just seems so concerned about that.
Girl, a straight man who doesn't want a dick in the butt because that's gay, but he wants his woman to peg him so fucking hard, but that's not gay. You know, like it's the mental hoops that we jump through. But again, because this ties in with the language. The language of kink events is it's sexy and it's raunchy and it's all your wildest dreams. And so because of that, people go in with an expectation, but the reality is when you're there in the moment, the human experience is very, very different. Even if the wording is the same, it takes on a new meaning. And we talk about this with gaining, as I'm sure you'll do with bondage all the fucking time. Just because this is the fantasy that you jerk off to, you get aroused and erect and you come and you orgasm and it's wonderful, does not mean that in a kink context that there will be erection, arousal, ejaculate, penetration. Those things may not come anywhere near the conversation. It may be very, very clean. It could even be platonic.
You know, literally the only times that I've been to parties where it really did turn into just an all-out orgy and everybody came at the end, it was just a group of civilian gay men, and there was usually drugs and alcohol involved.
Again, I feel like this is just coming back to this point on, like, what are we talking about today? We're talking about language and the thought that what we say and what we mean with our words can influence our thoughts, feelings, actions, and experiences. And this is where the conversations come to. The reality that when you put yourself in a position to be open to different experiences, different ideas, you're finding that there are more opportunities to experience positivity, maybe in ways that you didn't expect, but that's totally okay because a win is still a win. And how sometimes when we have a very narrow interpretation of things, that can limit us, limit our interpretation, and limit our own willingness to engage in the positive scenarios. Any person is allowed to say, oh, I've changed my mind, I don't want to have to engage in that situation. But as you expressed about this person, you made it about anal sex in the end, when that was never on the table. Why was there that expectation? And we know why that is. But we have to ask ourselves, why do we think this? What is our wording? What are our choices? What are our thoughts taking us to here? Could we maybe ask some questions using said words to garner some clarity and clarification so that we can move forward amicably? Why do we hold tight to those beliefs so intrinsically that we have to wait until the last possible second to say, I don't want to do gay sex, and then off we run?
Well, I don't know if this is going to be entirely useful, but like a little bit of advice that I would have for people who are who are struggling to find the language for what it is that they want out of, like, say they're going to a Grommr or whatever, or they're going to meet up with another gainer. You can be very clear about what you want from the beginning. You know, and if the other person is not receptive to that and starts making demands, this is not a person that you want to meet up with. It's not a person you're going to have a good time with. This is going to be a person who puts a lot of expectations on you, and it's just going to freak you out. So if you are upfront right away and you say, look, I don't consider myself a top or a bottom. I'm a side. I don't actually like penetrative sex. I'm not really that into oral sex. You know, what I'm really looking for is some genuine affection. I'm looking for some hugs, some kisses, some cuddles, some body contact. Just tell people that up front. Yes, there will probably be some people who say, well, I'm actually looking for sex, and they will toddle off and they'll find it one way or another. But every once in a while, you may run across someone who's totally fine with that. And, you know, I think that that level of physical intimacy probably leads to friendship a lot easier than butt fucking.
Yeah, it's like, especially because I live in a big city, a lot of people come for other reasons, like come for work or family or a vacation or something like that. And so it's very common for me to just hang out with like other bondage kinksters casually. And then if they come back again later, then we could plan more of like a session with each other. But, you know, with doing things as kinksters, I feel like it's so much work, like for us to do our thing. And like, sex feels like it's so easy. It feels like you could just walk into the street and just find somebody and then 10 minutes later be in a bedroom and doing the thing. But
Now, I was wondering something. So, you know, rhetoric deals with a grain of truth every now and again, and, you know, our biases around a particular subject. How does rhetoric around fatness differ from, like, the way that we are normally marginalized?
yeah, it's like, so one thing I thought about with this, it's funny how we kind of talk about certain historical contexts of fatness and everything, and how it kind of flip flops and takes certain dives and goes in different directions and everything like that throughout history. But then thinking about other marginalizations, I feel like blackness has kind of almost been the thing consistently throughout, and it's evolved somewhat, but it hasn't evolved that much. If you look at more sexist, gendered rhetoric, that also hasn't really evolved that much. It feels like with a lot of other things, it's more kind of like a steady, like almost sliding scale, whereas it seems like with fat rhetoric, it's kind of bounced around and taken different turns. And so kind of getting back to like, what Foucault was like saying about the soldier's body, of how that's a docile body because it's like using a human body as basically a machine and a tool and all of that. And how when you think of gay language for talking about different bodies and stuff like that, of how like what a clone is, it kind of aligns with Foucault's idea of that. And then it also just made me think of like, okay, well, so what about with like bears? Calling bears bears, like what does it connote? And then also like what are the good things and bad things about it? Because I know that there are a lot of people that would be considered bears in the gay community who don't like being called bears. It's like, I guess it's more of a question I'm directing at you.
I mean, I would like to be called a bear. The only reason I don't usually refer to myself as one is because I don't have a ton of body hair. And I always thought that that is what makes a bear, is the body hair aspect. And while I can grow some facial hair, I still don't have much in the way of chest hair or body hair anywhere on me. And so it makes me feel like I don't fit the bill. And some people say, well, you could be a bear cub. And I'm like, I'm 42. I'm not a fucking bear cub. Like I'm not young. Okay. So I think that's why I ended up settling on daddy, because it was a bit more amorphous and it could kind of fit whatever you wanted it to be.
I will say, there's a researcher and a university professor here in the UK, Nick Glynn, at the University of Brighton. He wrote a book, Bodies and Boundaries of UK Bear Spaces. He's currently working with the Bear Symposium, really beginning to do some research and exploring, like, what are the definitions and boundaries of bear identity and language and things like that. So it's all kind of tied in together there as well.
It's funny because this even kind of reminds me of, I think it is a blog post that I published talking about bear discourse on Tumblr. And because there was like a time in 2018 and I noticed several different interactions with people like writing to people on Tumblr from the bear community, because you could ask people public questions on there. And there were several people asking this one person basically to like kind of be a spokesperson of bears, and seeing the people to try to respond in a way of like kind of cordially trying to respond to their concerns or something like that. And I remember just finding that just like so interesting, that it's like, okay, so you're assuming that all bears are the same and think the same and feel the same way about you and how you look and everything. And then you're going to this one person to just like give you that advice of like how to attract a bear or something. And it's like, I don't think there's one universal way to do that.
And you know what? This happens in the gainer space. Like, how fat are you supposed to be before you're allowed to call yourself fat, before you can officially be considered a gainer, a big boy, when it comes to bondage? Like, are you a real rigger? Are you a real kinkster? Or, like, how many people do you, like, what does your resume need to say? How many kinksters do you have to have tied up before you're allowed to use that language? Again, that language, that definition. And in everyone's mind's eye, there is a different marker value for what is the true north, the true magnetic pole of what we're trying to orient ourselves towards. But the thing is, we're all operating on a three-dimensional globe and sphere, so north is actually pointing in a slightly different direction for every single person, and not everyone's trying to get to the same place. I think that's always been the beauty of language, that even in the identity of gainer, there is so much interpretation in terms of what kind of food you like to eat, how much you like to eat, how big you want to get, and how fast you want to get there. There's so much room for interpretation and fun and exploration, And I don't know. I feel like if I would want people to take something away from today's conversation, it would be that our words have power. And I feel like that is such a cliche thing to say, but like, goddamn it, people, it's fucking true. And sometimes we do need to be mindful of our words for our own protection, for the safety and wellness of others, for ease of communication, and for fun. Words are gorgeous. Pick up a dictionary. Learn some more, Well, y'all, I think we've come to the end of today's conversation. I think this is genuinely very, very fun. It was so interesting to explore a little bit of your, of course, with Kink Vision as a podcast, but a little bit of your experience in bondage and that use of language. Nat, I want to say a big thank you for your contributions today. This was a pleasure.
Yeah, this was this was great use of my master's degree in rhetoric.
Well, I'm really glad we could do that for you. And if anyone out there listening is bemoaned by the fact that they paid $200,000 on a degree that they're currently not working in the field of, reach out to us at thiccradio@gmail.com. Maybe we can create an episode where you can find a way to link your master's degree with being a fat son of a bitch. We will find a way. It'll be fabulous. Oh my goodness. But Nat, where can people find you online?
I'm on Instagram and BlueSky as Thoughtful Fetishist. On Instagram, I think it's thoughtful.fetishist. Also on Recon as Thoughtful Fetishist. If you're on there, hit me up.
Fabulous. Well, listen, y'all, that is a wrap for now here on Thicc Radio. Please remember to like and subscribe, rate us 5 stars, and leave us a good review. If you liked this episode, the podcast, our guest, or just us in general, please share it with your friends and encourage them to tune in. You can find me on Instagram and BlueSky at stannnum.
And you can find me on Instagram at ThickyMouse and Grommr at Orpheus. You can also find us on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok at Thicc Radio, or visit our website at podpage.com/Thicc Radio. If you'd like to become a financial supporter of the show, you can donate through our PayPal account, and you can always email us at thiccradio@gmail.com. So until next time, bye, Fats.
Bye, Fats.
Bye, Fats.
Let's talk about it.
Thicc Radio is a Spotify podcast.
Artwork, media design, editing, and production by James Heinsohn.
With original theme music by CYMK.